Hello everyone. Today we are here again with Minna Huotilainen, and today she'll be talking about the benefits of music at school age children. Please go ahead.
Okay, hello. So I'm going to discuss some recent findings about the brain research from school-age children who have music as their hobby. And I'm going to say something first about these structural and functional changes that we see occurring in these children's brains when they start practicing music and how they proceed in their hobbies. And then about something about what these changes actually mean. So how can we know what the benefits are, and especially we are talking about attentional benefits and then also things that are related to foreign language learning. And then finally, one very special group of children is children who have problems with hearing. And we have studied here in Helsinki children who are wearing cochlear implants. And as you may know, the cochlear implants, they really don't uh, give you the same information as you would without the implant. So there are many different distortions and trouble when you are listening with a cochlear implant. So you need very special kind of help, and musical training can actually provide this kind of help. But let's get back to that later, and let's start now with the structural and functional changes. So this is probably one of the most famous papers. This is by Krista Hyde from Canada, where she was looking at children's brains, just the brain structure, when the children were starting to practice piano. And she compared the same children's brains before they started practicing and after they had been practicing for 15 months. And what she found was that there were clear changes in the gray matter, in the auditory and motor areas of the brain, and also in the corpus callosum. And practicing the musical instrument had actually made these types of changes in their children's brains, first by enhancing the activity in these areas. But since this enhancement of activity had continued for quite a long time, so then also there were evident structural changes. And what would be the importance of these types of changes? So these are the same areas, of course, that the children had been using when practicing music, but they are not music areas in the brain. They are areas that are generally related to audition, to motor actions, and so on. And that's why the structural changes in these areas could help the children in tasks that are related to audition. So, for example, listening to speech in noise, which is a very important daily task for all school-age children. And also in motor tasks, especially in fine motor tasks, and then also maybe in other more higher level tasks like attention or perceiving structures in the environment. But this is more kind of a speculative at the moment. You can also measure these functional changes in the children's brains when they are practicing music. This is work by Vesa Putkinen. He was recording brain responses to changes in chords in children at the age of 7 years. And here the children were starting a musical training, and the other group of children, the control group, they were also starting some hobbies, but those hobbies were not related to music. And Vesa followed up this group. He recorded the same brain responses every 2 years when they were practicing their hobbies. And as you can see in the beginning, the responses at the age of 7 years in the music group and in the control group are very similar. But what happens when the music group continues practicing is that the responses start to grow larger. And also not only the MMN response, which is signifying the detection of the change in the chords, but also the P3A response, which is related to the change of attention, allocation of attention towards these changes. So these are evidence of functional changes that you can see in the children when they are learning music. Here, Vesa was using only 2 chords, one minor chord and one major chord. And if if you want to go into more details with the chords, so you can appreciate the fact that the frequencies of the chords are actually almost the same. So in the major chord and in the minor chord that was used in the experiment, the lower and the upper frequencies are actually exactly the same, and there is only a minor change in the middle frequency of the chord. Paula Virtala went through great trouble in making stimuli that could actually directly show that these children are processing the chords and not only those changes in the frequencies. So she made also other types of changes in the chords. For example, the inversions, which are here on the third line. The inverted major chord to an untrained person sounds almost the same as the normal major chord on the first line. But it is, if you look at the frequencies, you can see that it is actually very different. So the upper frequency has been transposed down with an octave, so it's very much lower actually. And then also there is another way of making changes in the chords, and this is adding dissonance. So the fourth row in this picture shows a very dissonant chord where the lower and the upper frequencies are still the same as in the major and minor chords, but the middle one is positioned so that it creates a very large dissonance. And this is a chord that really pops out from a sequence of chords because it sounds so bad and so different from the other chords. And what Paula did was that she created a sequence of chords where the frequencies of the chords were changing. So the same chord was presented from different frequency levels. And now, as you can see, the deviant chords, the ones that we are investigating here, they are positioned so that the frequencies in the deviant chords are always present also in the standard chords. So if the brain of the child can make the difference between the standards and the deviants, it has nothing to do with simple frequencies, but it actually has to be something that is related to the differences between the chords, the actual chord identities, and not the frequencies. And what she did was that she replicated the same study in children who had musical training and who didn't have musical training. And as you can see, the result is the same. So the distinction between the major chord and the minor chord gives a large, clear response in the musically trained children, as you can see in blue here, while it really doesn't in the non-trained group. The inverted chords, well, they don't really give a clear response in the musically trained or non-trained children. It's very difficult to say if they are able to pick them up or not. There's also another way of looking at musically relevant brain responses in children, and this is by inserting these minor changes into melodies. And when you do this, so you are actually asking the brain to remember a short piece of melody, which you repeat only a few times. And you may make many different types of musically relevant changes in the melodies. Like here in the study of Vesa Putkinen, he had made changes in the melody itself, in the rhythm of the melody, also in the tuning. As you may know, mistuning is something that children who have musical training, they practice very much to recognize mistuning. Also, you can change the timbre so that it sounds like a different instrument is suddenly starting to play. Also, he made some delays in the timing of the melody and also some transpositions. And you can see here how the brain responses of children with musical training and children without musical training, how they developed from the age of 9 years up to 11 years and up to 13 years. At the age of 7 years, these two groups don't differ. And mostly also at the age of 9 years, you don't see many differences. But after some more training, at the age of 11 years, you already start to see some differences. For example, the detection of rhythm modulations and the change of timbre, the change of instrument, are already give already much more larger responses in the musically trained children, and especially when you play with a slight mistuning, you can see that the brains of the musically trained children, they really respond very quickly and clearly to the mistuning. And this goes on also up to the age of 13 years. So I think that these data quite nicely show that there is a progression of training. So when the child is training music, he gets more and more skills in the area of music. His brain becomes more and more tuned towards music during the years that he is practicing. And this is also highlighting very much the fact that musical training itself, and not some kind of like a genetic background or predisposition towards music, would be the key to understanding the differences between the musically trained children's brains and the control children's brains. Vesa Putkinen was also looking at how much musical activities, completely informal musical activities in children affect the brain responses. Because it is quite interesting that many of the studies that are looking at musical training, they talk a lot about children who have classical musical training. They are playing the violin or the piano in a music school, but there is a lot more happening out there. There are children who are practicing via the internet. Their friends are helping them. They are learning to play the guitar in the garage band or something like this. And many children are very interested in music at home. They like to sing and play and so on without any specific training. And it's quite important to realize that these kind of very informal musical activities also are advancing the brain responses of the children who are practicing this kind of informal musical activities. Here you can see brain responses to changes in duration, in gaps in sounds, in the change of frequency of the sound, intensity and location. And you can see that all of these brain responses, the sizes of the brain responses, are correlated to the informal musical activities that these children do at home. So this is real training, this is real practice. They are doing whatever they want with music. They sing when they want and they make up their own songs and so on. But this is really important learning event for the brain. And the same can be observed also in brain responses to surprising sounds. These surprising sounds are quite often used to look at attentional capacities in children. And here you can see that the amount of singing that the child is doing and the amount of musical activities at the home that the child is doing, these are related also to the attentive brain responses. The novel P3A amplitude is reflecting the moment when the surprising sound is actually turning the child's attention towards something interesting, something novel, something surprising in the environment. And then the reorienting response that you can see on the right side of the figure, this is related to the event when the child is voluntarily turning his attention back from the surprising sound to the original task that he was actually performing. So these both cognitive tasks are very important if you think about daily life situations like working in a noisy office or trying to learn at school when there is some background noise. So here you can see that the brains of the children who had been very active in music, they had been developing their attentional capabilities also faster because of the musical training. Okay, indeed there are several studies where musical interventions have been done at schools. This means that the children who take part in the musical interventions, they didn't choose music as a hobby, but they were randomly allocated to groups that do some kind of intervention at school. This intervention could be music, but it could be also a control intervention, something like writing tasks or drama club or some visual arts or something like this. And the way that these studies are designed is that first there is a pre-test where different types of tasks are given to the children. This could be math, it could be spatial reasoning, verbal tasks, reading tasks, writing tasks, perception of prosody, and so on. And then after this, there is the time of the intervention where the children are actively engaged in musical interventions or then another control intervention. And then after the intervention ends, there is a post-test where the same skills are tested in the children again. And then there is a comparison, how much change in the tasks have been, in the performance have been found due to the intervention. And these studies really show that these types of skills in children develop when they are involved in musical interventions. So it seems that there is also behavioral evidence, not only evidence from the brain studies, but also from this type of behavioral intervention studies showing that musical interventions actually are beneficial for the cognitive development of these children.
Could you perhaps just tell me what's the duration of those interventions usually?
Yeah, well, it varies.
Approximately.
Very often it's like a practical question. So if you think about the school year, the intervention cannot be longer than a school year. Typically they are a few months, and in some cases even shorter. So it could be only something like 8 to 10 times of this intervention, and they are typically something like 45 minutes to 1.5 hours at a time, and very typically they are group interventions, so the whole group of 20 to even to 30 children are working with the intervention together in their normal school groups. So these are typically not individual interventions.
Okay, thank you.
Also, attention could be one kind of explaining factor here, because if you look at the different types of behavioral benefits that children are getting from the musical interventions, so there must be some kind of a very general factor behind this. We know that their auditory system develops, but why does their reading develop? Why does their math skills develop? And one proposal from the scientific community is that it would be actually their attentive capabilities that are developing, because attention is important for any kind of task that you are running. So when musical hobbies are increasing the attentive capabilities and also the executive functions and the sustained attention capabilities, so this would be beneficial for the children in any kind of task that they are performing. And here are some data from Helsinki from our studies where we were looking at children who have music as a hobby and other hobbies. And we were running a neuropsychological test on them. And in this test, your attention is really, this is a very attention demanding task. You have to answer very quickly, and you are not supposed to make mistakes, and the rules of answering are changing also during the experiment. So it is very, very demanding, and you have to keep your attention focused all the time. And here you can see that the results from the children who have music as their hobby, and then from the children who have other types of hobbies. And especially at the age of 12 years, you can see that children with musical hobbies, they answer faster, and also they make less mistakes. So this is clear proof that actually their attentional capabilities are better, especially at the age of 12 years. These are data from children who have been receiving a musical intervention, a group intervention, and these children have been tested for their speech in noise performance. And you can see here, this is Jessica Slater's work, where she has been looking at how well the children can hear speech in noise. And you can see that the more instrument training they have taken, the better they are in the speech in noise perception. And this is again something that can explain the development of cognitive skills, because if you think about receiving instructions in a noisy situation, in a complex situation with a lot of people speaking at the same time and so on, you can imagine that these children who can perceive speech in noise better, it is easier for them to understand and hear the instructions and go according to the rules of the experiment and the test and so on. So this is again another kind of cognitive benefit from musical training. Here is also data from the same group, from the same children also, after receiving musical training. This is work by Nina Krause's group, and she has been looking at the consonant vowel syllable responses from the brainstem of these children, and how the consonant vowel responses are developing according to the actual acoustic features of the consonant. After a longer time of training, you can see that the change in the neural distinction between these different consonants becomes larger. So this means that it is more accurately represented in the brainstem, and it is easier for the child to differentiate between the different consonants when it's better represented in their brains. Again, one more piece of evidence that musical training actually helps children to understand speech better, also in difficult conditions, in difficult listening conditions, like when you are at school. Here in Finland, Riia Milovanov has studied the pronunciation and perception of English language phonemes in school children who have musical hobbies. And what she actually found was that those children who have musical hobbies, they pronounce English better. They also perceive English language phonemes better, and also their brain responses to these English language phonemes are stronger. It was a finding in school-age children, but she also made some experiments in young adults and also smaller children, and she found this same pattern to go across the age group. So it's quite interesting that practicing music can help the brain to perceive and pronounce a foreign language better. Here are some other data from the foreign language phoneme map, how to be able to add new phonemes in the phoneme map, which is containing your native language phonemes. Here on the left you can see our data from by Istvan Winkler, showing that those Hungarians who don't know Finnish, they don't have representation for the Finnish phoneme ä, which is not typical in Hungarian language. But those Hungarians who can speak Finnish, they have the representation for that phoneme, because they must have it. They must have learned it when they have learned Finnish language. In the middle you can see a control condition where such phonemes which are present in both Hungarian and Finnish language were used. So you can see that all of the participants have clear representations for these phonemes. So what these Hungarians who learned Finnish, what they actually have done is that they have changed their phoneme map to contain the Finnish language phoneme that wasn't there when they were only speaking Hungarian. On the right you can see data from small children who were attending, who were Finnish-speaking children who were attending French daycare. And in the beginning you can see with the dotted line those children who didn't attend the French daycare, they were monolingual Finnish children, and then with the full lines those children who were attending the French daycare. You can see that in the very beginning of the experiment they didn't have representations for the French phonemes, but after going to the daycare for several months you can see that the representations have actually appeared. So these children have been able to incorporate the French phonemes into their phoneme map, which previously contained only the Finnish phonemes. This is hard work, but for the children it is not so hard, because just by being exposed to the French language, being surrounded by the French language, this kind of automatically happens to them. Actually, when you have 2 or more languages in your brain, it seems to be very beneficial. Here is one nice study from Spain showing how speakers of 2 or more languages actually have good cognitive inhibition in their auditory system. So when they are in a task where you have to inhibit some auditory responses, so they are performing very well in that task, and they are also showing specific inhibition-related brain responses. And why is this? Well, it is because when you are speaking several languages, all of those languages are active in your brain. And when you are choosing words, you have to choose the right words, but also you have to choose them from the right language. You cannot mix the languages together when you are speaking. And that's why the inhibition is very, very important and well developed in brains of people who know 2 or more languages. And this is very much related also to musical training, because music can also be considered as a kind of a language in the brain. And when we are practicing music, we must learn a lot of inhibition. This seems to be very, very, very helpful for also the second language learning. Okay, and then finally we come to those children who are wearing cochlear implants. These children are deaf by birth or deafened at some point of their life. And because of the deafness, the cochlear implant has been installed inside their skull. So they have a specific device that is trying to mimic the auditory response that is coming from the middle ear. Of course, it is not a very good one. It is nothing compared to a natural ear, but it is trying to give a kind of an impression of the sound that is in the surroundings. It only has a few channels, something like 20 channels, whereas we know that in a natural ear we have more than 20,000 different frequency channels and so on. So the difference is really crucial. These children, when they receive the cochlear implant as a very young children, they typically learn to speak and understand speech really well. But they have some minor problems, and one of the most important ones is understanding speech in noise. When these children are in noisy conditions, they find it very, very difficult to understand speech. And this is, of course, a property of the cochlear implant. It is not designed for this kind of purposes. In our studies with Ritva Torppa here in Helsinki, we looked at the children who received cochlear implants and who participated in group musical activities developed by Ritva Torppa. These activities included a lot of singing, but also instrument playing, different kinds of plays with music, different kinds of poems, and so on. Many different kinds of musical activities. And the children also continued these musical activities at home according to their own will. Some children were really into singing, and even though they had the cochlear implant, which makes it more difficult for them to hear, they still like music. They love music, and they want to be active also in music. And when we were comparing the brain responses of those children who sang regularly at home and whose parents also sang regularly with the children at home, and who also had other different types of musical activities at home, we realized that their brain responses to different changes in the acoustic input are developing faster. So music in these children can act as a kind of a training program for speech. Their speech abilities are developing better and faster when they are working to understand and to produce some music. So actually those children who receive a cochlear implant, they should also receive musical training, because it would help them. Of course they learn music, but they also learn to understand speech. And most importantly, their speech in noise skills are developing. And this is very important for their daily activities in the society, especially at school. So, as a conclusion, we have seen that there are many changes in the brains of children who are practicing music. Some of these changes are structural, and many of them are functional, and we also have seen many different behavioral benefits of musical training in children. And we can see that these changes in the brains are beneficial for the practical activities what the children are doing, and especially in foreign languages, in speech in noise, and attention and executive functions could be one factor that is actually explaining what is happening in these children and in their behavioral development. And finally, we also discussed about children with cochlear implants, how it would be so important for them to participate in musical training. Okay, that was all my material that I had today.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really very interesting. I just have a few questions. First, about the development of phoneme map. You said that if children are exposed to another language later on, they actually add new phonemes to their map. But is it possible to get the same quality of response after a certain time, or there will always be some gap between the children who have originally learned something and those who have learned something later on? For instance, also here in Slovenia, we have a lot of different dialects, and my wife is from another region, from the western part, and their dialect is a bit different. And well, I consider myself being pretty good at languages, but still, they say that I'm not able to reproduce some sounds the same quality as they are, so that they can hear the difference of the dialect. Because I wasn't exposed to that dialect as a child in early childhood. Do you find some evidence about that also, or is that just lack of, I don't know, effort or something like that?
Well, I think there are many very big individual differences. So for some people, it is very easy to learn new languages and learn them so well that they can actually pronounce them to a very, very high level, even when they are learning them as adults, especially if they have learned many languages already before. So if you have learned several languages in your childhood, you have a very wide phoneme map full of phonemes that you can actually use when you are learning new languages. You can just, pick a nice close enough phoneme from your phoneme map. But if you have learned only one language as a child, your phoneme map is full of holes. You only have those phonemes that are the ones that belong to your native language. But there are really people who can learn really well even as adults. But I think the general rule is that the younger you learn the language, the better you will be at pronouncing the language. And of course, many people also like to keep their pronunciation. So this also part of personality. So I don't know if it's a bad thing.
Another thing that I found very interesting is also that the brain response at mistuning is very strong with the group that had musical training. For instance, sometimes I watch television and there are some shows, or reality shows or something like that, and then people over there sing some songs, and very often it's really horrible.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have any sense of tune anymore, and I think it's really sad and very difficult for someone who is trained to listen to them. Well, just a comment.
Yeah, I think when these brain responses are recorded in a passive condition, so these children are not paying attention to the sounds, but they are just hearing the sounds, and still their brain is reacting really strongly to the mistuning. So they have already automatized the reactions to the mistuning, and this will stay in their brains for the rest of their lives. So whenever they hear something that is mistuned, their brain will react to it. They cannot prevent it, and that's the way the musician's brain is.
I know, yes.
Yeah.
And the last thing is, I think I found it very useful, interesting, of course, that music activities are beneficial also not just for other musical skills, but also for, let's say, math skills or spatial reasoning and so on. And your uh, conjecture is that it's mostly due to the attention span and focus and so on, right?
Yes, there are many theories that scientists have proposed, and one theory that I find very interesting is related to the structural perception. So this theory was proposed first by Talal and Gaab, and they proposed that when you are listening to music and when you are practicing music, you are exposed to many structures. So, for example, in a pop song, you have the verse and you have the lyrics go according to a certain structure, and you can always anticipate something that is going to happen soon. And when you learn the musical pieces by heart, you pay attention to the structures like A, B, A, and so on. That is built inside the music. And this might actually help you in recognizing other structures in the world. So, for example, if you
Patterns,
are
right?
yes.
Yeah.
So if you are, for example, performing a math task and you are focusing on some very small detail in the task, but you still at the same time you have to keep in your mind the full content of the task. So you have to be able to go from the top level to the very detailed level and back all the time, like you are doing when you are practicing music. You have to focus on each note, but you cannot be too much focused on the detail level because you have to remember the whole piece and where you are in the piece and what is the meaning of this structure in the piece and so on. And they are proposing that this would be a kind of a general learning mechanism that would help people to understand larger structures via finding them in music. You could start finding them in the other types of tasks that you are performing. But okay, this is one theory and it could be true. And then most people, I think, are focusing on understanding the attentional and executive function development in children with musical training, because this is again something that can be beneficial for anything that you want to do.
Of course, I agree. Okay, thank you very much. It's been incredibly interesting. Thank you for your knowledge and expertise, and well, hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.